I'm going to discuss Schiller, Chapter 7, Monopoly, as a part of the market structure discussion. In this instance, the monopoly is referred to as a single seller. And so given that, then unlike the perfectly competitive market, that was a price, any given firm is a price taker, monopoly is a price setter, meaning that it is a market, and therefore the price that it sets is designed and determined by itself, as opposed to a competitive firm where it had to accept the market price and sell all it could. And so given that it is a price setter, it means that it has market power. And any firm that has market power is faced with a downward sloping demand curve. Quantity and price, the demand curve is downward sloping. And the idea here is that it can set the price and then trace its consequence to the demand curve, and that will determine the level of output it can expect to sell. So that's why firms with market power no longer are faced with a horizontal demand curve, but rather downward sloping. And so there is another layer of discussion. Earlier, the demand curve for a competitive firm was also its marginal revenue curve, meaning that additional units sold always brought the price. So therefore, marginal revenue, additional revenue, when you sell one more unit, is equal to the price. In this case, for a firm to sell more, it has to drop the price. We understand that, except that it's not only on the last unit that it has to drop the price, but it has to drop the price on all previous units. And so therefore, the marginal revenue curve is a line that lies underneath and below the demand curve, reflecting the fact that at each point in time, additional revenue from sales is lower than the price, because you get the price for the last unit, but since you lower the prices of previous units that you would have sold, then additional revenue will be less than the price you just charged. So therefore, marginal revenue would be below the demand curve. Now, the next question is, how do you decide where should be the level of output? Well, like all other firms, a monopoly also has a marginal cost curve, which is, again, is supply curve as well. And if it's a profit maximizing firm, it follows the rule of profit max output is where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost condition. So that happens to be at this point where it will decide for its profit maximization level of production. Now, the price that it can charge obviously is determined by the willingness of the consumers to pay, and so therefore price is determined by the level of output that the firm wishes to sell. Now, beyond that, the next question is, how profitable is this kind of firm? To determine that, we have to figure out two things: total revenue and total cost. So this firm also has a marginal revenue, average total cost curve. And to determine the profit per unit, here is the price value, and here is the average total cost value. So this distance is let's say between A and B, AB is profit per unit. That is the difference between price minus average total cost. That's what the firm receives, and this is what on average it costs to produce. And of course, if you multiply that by the number of units that a firm is producing, that will produce the total revenue, total profit for the firm. And that's how profit is calculated for a monopoly. And now, if we were to understand this in the context of competition and so forth, the question is a monopoly a better arrangement for the market? To see that, let's assume that monopoly is actually representative of all the firms in a competitive industry, which again we had the same demand curve, and the supply curve, which is the marginal cost curve. So if this monopoly was actually a representation of a series of small competitive firms all come together and make the market, the equilibrium between demand and supply will determine the output and the price. So this would be the output of a competitive industry, while this output would be output of a monopoly. And at the same time, this is the price of a competitive industry, and this is the price of a monopoly. And you can see that under monopoly conditions, the output is lower than it would have been under competitive industry, and the price is higher. And that's why monopolies are generally disliked by policymakers, because it has social implications. They produce less goods and services and make it available to the citizens, and what they do produce, they price it higher. So that's why we have antitrust laws against monopolies. And reasons for monopolies to exist essentially are to barrier or enter. If you remember, in a case perfectly competitive, barriers to entry was or to non-existent, but in monopoly, all sorts of support is the presence of patent protection that will give some firm for certain products. You will see some with farm example. These days, there's a big agriculture is and so forth. And there are restriction, market entry, licensing prevents us from market creating to penetrate, and the government of franchisees, or the individual exclusive, for example, would be just male general companies, the status naturally change for rates, uh, that one reason they're kind of a competitive industry. Firms produce firms that survive. This is the market. All firms that survive the industry, their average to the price, excess profit, cost of course, proprietor or the owner of business in the form of wages or profits, but in the form of a return on being in business. And so as a result, there is no excess profit in this environment. Now, unfortunately, it's the case that no one has sufficient for engaging R&D and product development. And so therefore, you need a larger firm to be able to produce new products or engage in research and development. That's one argument. And then, of course, another argument in favor of monopolies is that monopolies tend to be large as opposed to a large number of small firms, and that will lead to economies of scale. And the idea is that if there's a level of output, and this is average cost, firms produce at their lowest average cost. However, by expanding production, they can push the average cost down. And this process can continue as long as the firm continues to expand, and that produces a declining long run average cost. If that's the case, then there is some support in favor of allowing large firms to emerge, which will bring their average long run average cost down. These are all short run average costs, but in the long run, as the firm expands, it can produce lower average costs for higher level of production, meaning larger operation size. And of course, it is very possible that monopolies can grow too big, and if that's the case, then costs will begin to creep up, and therefore generates a reverse situation where the long run average cost begins to creep up. We usually refer to it as diseconomies of scale, meaning the firm has grown too large, and then the long run average cost is creeping up as a result. So there is no definitive answer in terms of the size of the operation and efficiency. It can reach a point where even large firms will become too chaotic, too confusing, many layers of management, and as a result, they become bloated with or top heavy, and therefore the cost structure begins to creep up. So in essence, this summarizes the discussion on monopolies, and the reason we have discussed two extreme cases, from one end perfect competition and the other extreme is monopoly, to highlight the benefits associated with competitive market, and also emphasize that on the other extreme, even though it is possible to have single producers, but generally they are not welcomed for a host of reasons, among which is that they have too much power and they can actually produce products at a lower level of output and charge higher prices than competitive markets. So with that discussion, I'm going to pause here and we'll entertain some of the questions for discussion on page 160, and I would encourage you to pause at this point and try to answer. The questions we're going to discuss are these are questions for discussion, and we're going to discuss question number 5, 8, and 9. And I would encourage you to pause here and try to answer these questions, and then return and view this remainder of this lecture. Now, question number 5: why don't monopolies try to establish the highest price possible, as many people pledge? Well, if you establish the highest price, let's say, the volume is significantly lower. So therefore, that may not be the strategy that the monopoly wishes to pursue. Uh, then the follow-up portion of this question would say, it says, what would happen to sales? Of course, sales will drop if they only went after the highest price, and then of course profits will suffer as a result. And that's the response to question number 5. Number 8: what entry barriers exist in 1. the fast food industry? So fast food industry, the barriers are essentially, of course, if you want to get into becoming a large franchise, of course, a lot of upfront uh, resources are required for advertisement and promotion of the franchise and so forth, but very minimum, just the licensing and of course the facilities and equipment and so forth. Those are what is required to enter into a fast food industry. Um, in terms of a cable TV, of course, you need a lot more infrastructure and Part B cable TV to establish cable TV services, is in terms of the cable running to neighborhoods, and of course the programming and maintenance and the billing and so forth and so on. So it is a significantly larger undertaking. In case of auto industry, of course, it's extremely difficult because automobile is one of those things that you do need scale economies to be profitable, and so that means significant upfront funding for design development and the manufacturing operations that makes it extremely difficult for anybody to become a serious player in auto manufacturing industry. And finally, in terms of illegal drug trade, of course, barriers are just that are illegal, and the government will try to break your operations up. But then, of course, it requires type of characters